Happy Friday, everyone. I'm glad that you're here. So excited to have you with me on another Live with Kevin on a Friday at noon Eastern time as a part of this Future of Work series. You know, we've been doing these on Fridays in this, what we're calling the Future of Work series. And I'm going to introduce my first guest here in a second. And I say that first guest because this is the first in this series where I've had two guests, but not at the same time, one following the other. So I was telling my first guest, who I'll introduce in just a second, that we've done a tremendous amount of work around remote leadership, hybrid teammates, all of this transition work, LinkedIn learning courses in this area. And so this Future of Work series is our attempt to bring other experts who have expertise beyond ours and beyond mine that all applies to this Future of Work world. And so I'm glad that you are all here. If you're here live, whatever platform that you're on, I hope that you'll share your questions and your comments. And you can tell me right now where you're located. We'd love to know where you're located as I bring in my first guest today. I'm going to let him show his smiling face first. There he is. You can see his name. Let me introduce you to Dr. Gordon. Dr. Evian Gordon is the founder and chairman of Brain Resource Company and TotalBrain.com. He is the founder of the largest standardized international brain database, the scientific chairman and founding director of the Brain Dynamics Center at Westmead Hospital, and the director of BrainNet.net. He published the first book on integrative neuroscience titled Integrative Neuroscience, bringing together biological, psychological, and clinical models of the human brain. He has both a PhD and an MD. He is far smarter than me, and I'm happy to have him as my first guest today. Evian, welcome.
Thank you, Kevin. It's a great pleasure to be here.
And you're here in part because of our mutual friend,
Oh, absolutely.
Heidi, who's joining us apparently on her elliptical as we chat. So hello, Heidi.
When Heidi Henner recommends something to me, I don't ask why. So good morning, Heidi.
Well, there you go. Well, and so all of us are the beneficiary. The rest of the story is that originally I asked her and she wasn't going to be available today. So I said, who should I have? And she said, you need to have Evian. So here you are. And I'm excited that you're here. And I think I want to start with, again, you are far smarter than I. So I want to start with this question of what is integrative neuroscience? Like, what is that even? Why should that matter to the layperson?
Well, we live in an era where, the human brain, every home should have one. And the challenge of that, of course, Kevin, is that my background, in fact, was in the heart before I switched to the brain. And I work very closely now with the American Heart Association. And it's so fascinating when you look at the heart, how easy it is to communicate what to do. If you've got high blood pressure, this is what you do. If you've got a beat problem, this is how you fix it. If you've got a blockage, this is how you unblock it. Now, the problem with the brain is that the complexity is such an obvious order of magnitudes greater with 85 billion highly interconnected neurons that we get overwhelmed. And so everybody goes into their silos. I mean, the fundamental medicine was find a problem, get the solution, and it works most of the time. Like in cardiology, you've got a blocked artery, unblock it. In the brain, the silos were wonderful, and they were the cauldron of millions of pieces of information about the brain. The problem is, Kevin, that unless you put those pieces together, interconnection, forget about the word integration, interconnection. If you do not see, if I'm stressed, I am going to have problems remembering stuff. If I'm stressed, I am going to have problems reframing in this very challenging era of uncertainty. If I'm stressed, I'm going to basically create a lot of inflammation and have increased my likelihood of a chronic illness. So the point of interconnection is to provide a straightforward way to let people befriend their brains, like understand that, yes, don't panic, but the truth of the matter is in a fifth of a second, things happen to you called emotions and intuitions that drive everything about you. But don't worry about that for the moment. What you can control is your stress. And so we guide you step by step, but in a more interconnected, integrative way. So that's the essence of integration. And then the deeper ways is to measure that and find what works in befriending your brain for real, like people befriend their hearts.
I love that. I love that a lot. Now, I'm looking across my office here at one of the, I don't know, 8 bookshelves here. And on that shelf, there was a time that I was organized and I had books in order based on topic. And there's like, I don't know, 7, 8 books across there about the brain, how it works, how it functions. And I'm not nearly on the level that you're on. And I haven't studied it as much in recent years as I did at some point in the past. But one of the things that I remember reading multiple times, and this has been several years ago, was that we've learned more about the brain in the last 5 years than we learned in all of history before that. So is that still true? Like because of folks like you, we're learning a whole lot about our brain. Is it still sort of that exponential almost sort of rate?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Kevin, the answer is yes and no. And I hate yes and no questions because they sound like a politician, and I'm not. We're brain warriors. Heidi and I, we're brain warriors. So here's the answer why yes. So yes, of course. I mean, there's this explosion of information, and now with AI and data and genomes, we measure genetics, 850,000 SNPs. We measure in a single cheek swab. For $60, you can get your genetics. So yes, of course, there's more information, but the no is that the information has drowning people. And so what's become actually less resolved is the simplicities that actually drive the key insights are not well resolved and not well communicated, not well known. So you often hear people say, oh, the brain, the last frontier, we know nothing about. Actually, there's a lot we know about the essence of the way the brain works. It's just getting drowned in the panoply of phenomenal facts and information because unlike the heart, there was not an easy way to distill, organize. So everybody's got their own fad theory, and often the theories may be right, but they're so competitive and siloed, it's very hard to know what. So I'd say yes and no. There's a big challenge, and I'll just give you a quick context about that. I just came back last night from a wonderful conference with a group called One Mind, who I would urge you to include in your future of work, because they are the largest group that brings together corporates for mental health. But what struck me at that meeting is not just the phenomenal work that they do for increasing awareness, empathy, compassion, changing the narrative in the workplace with corporate, mainly CEOs and C-suite people they work with, but really phenomenal job. But what was the resounding takeaway for me was that even though the intention is to talk about mental health, 30% about let's empathize with how serious, how challenging these broken thoughts are for all of us. And there is no them and us. Everybody has got mental health at the center of their lives. And it's a tremendous disservice to ourselves and to our culture, any culture, to not recognize that reality. There's no them and us. But putting that to one side, that phenomenally being addressed, the solutions, people just duck. It's like, what solutions? Where do we start? So yes, we've got the so-called experts, and I am presented as one of those so-called experts. Shocking inability of all of us. We have dropped the ball so badly to help identify. There are simple things you can do and understand about the brain, but they're lost in the. It makes the politics of America look like a Sunday afternoon picnic. It's like, what?
Okay,
so
well,
that is my yes and no. That is my yes and no answer.
Well, so you said something that will be the thing I think about the rest of the day. And so I'm going to underline it for everybody else in case you missed it. And if you're not watching live, you're watching later, you can scroll back and listen again. You said simplicity drives insight. That when it becomes too complex, we no longer can find the insight. I think there's tremendous, profound value in that statement for all of us. And I brought you here, though. I mean, I invited you here because I didn't bring you anywhere. I invited you here because I wanted to talk about solutions. But before we get to solutions, I want to frame the question a little bit more. I know that you mentioned One Mind, and because of they were a part of this this mental health index U.S. worker edition. You want to say a little bit about what you all learned from this?
So sure, but it would be remiss of me not to firstly acknowledge the company that I'm with, Total Brain, which you basically use the assessment that I set up, the standardized international database assessment, which is essentially bringing all the information about the brain together in a standardized way into one database. And then what Total Brain have done phenomenally, in my view, I don't do the development, and we've got a wonderful CEO, Louis Gagnon, a wonderful development team across the country and in Australia. The science team, we've distilled 12 measures of the brain's capacity: emotion, feeling, thinking, and cognition, and 7 mental health conditions that we screen for in 20 minutes. And then a whole lot of tools to help resolve it. But what One Mind and the National Alliance, which is mainly the Fortune 500 of America, and American Health Policy Institute got together, and this was an idea from our wonderful our CEO. Is a phenomenal marketing person from Amazon, ex-Amazon executive, and he came up with this idea: why don't we use our scores as a national mental health index? Because he had done that before in corporates. And so One Mind really particularly helped launch this using our scores, where each month we would snapshot. We have over 40 very large corporates that use the Total Brain platform to assess and train the brain. We use those assessment scores to check the pulse of American workers with respect to their brain and their mental health across the COVID era. And every month we report on that index. You can follow the data, mental health index, Total Brain. And so that was what the essence of it was. And it's been an incredible journey to see the extent to which the uncertainties and the dynamics of COVID have been reflected in the way people's brain capacities work, and the mental health flags because the mental health screen, basically all of that, the capacities in the screen in 20 minutes, and it's been almost like a barometer of what's going on. And it's been companies have really found it a useful index and benchmark for themselves to use to reframe where we are now for the future of work.
So I know there's a lot of data there, and there's something else that you shared with me that we'll put another slide up in a few minutes. But before we go there, and maybe you're going to say, Kevin, it's related. So if so, I'll just put the slide up. What's the big takeaway now? You said it's a barometer, which means that this mental health index is changing during the course of the pandemic. What should we as individuals and we as leaders know now about what you're seeing across folks in this area?
Given our limited time, and given what I've said, that we such integrative scientists, such poor communicators of the essence, would you mind putting up the slide, and I'll just focus on one essence?
Absolutely.
So I could talk about this and do present it every month, and there's a lot of detail for those who want to look at the actual data. It's online. So here's an example across the whole COVID period on the left. Each month is a data point. And you can see stress on the left, the volatility, the going up of stress, and then it's sort of come down and sort of settled, but it's very volatile. On the other hand, and as I say, there's lots of other indices. I'm just focusing on one example, Kevin, that I think is seminal for the future of work. And that is, we found that the self-reporting of post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, this is not clinical post-traumatic stress disorder where people have a very significant traumatic event that then intrudes into their lives. This is the essence of post-traumatic stress disorder, is that people have very, very intense feelings and thoughts about their uncertainties. And what's happened, post-traumatic stress disorder does not happen at the time. It takes a few months to sort of aggregate, to start manifesting this level of extreme thoughts and extreme feelings. And so what you see here, Kevin, is about 6 months ago, the post-traumatic stress disorders index started to climb up. And clearly this is a slightly different very different to clinical, but it's the same sense of severity, whereby these multiple, it would seem like these multiple little stresses, these brain hijacks that we all have experienced in the COVID era, the uncertainty, the volatility, the political weirdness about vaccines, but mainly work-related stress. We do surveys as well, just about work stress. 86% of people, as you know, stressed about going back to work. So the point is, when you aggregate all of that and the current uncertainties with Delta, and you see this growing, sustained increase in severe thoughts and feelings and concerns about the uncertainty. So that's why the data has been such a surprisingly, obvious in some ways, but in other ways, really good data, really good models, dynamical models show the unexpected. And this level of concern that people have was unexpected. I mean, we all knew people are going to be stressed, and resilience is an issue, but this is a sort of one of the many, but one of the standout points, which is why I focus on that, Kevin.
So I don't know about anyone else who's watching right now, but I know that when you sent me this slide, I wasn't expecting to see something about PTSD. So you've sort of said this, but talk a little bit more. Well, I want to say a little bit more about that. I'm going to pull this slide down here in a second, but how is the PTSD you're talking about here different from
from clinical?
Because I think people are, if they're like me, they're sort of freaking out by that phrase, right? So
so that's why I'm deliberately don't want to overstate it. It's not a clinical PTSD. It is just, when you look at PTSD, which we do look for, we ask people about questions about PTSD in the screen, clinical PTSD. If you do have, unfortunately, if you have PTSD, what was your trauma? How did your trauma intrude in your life? To what level of severity? So you ask questions about the extent to which people don't even want to get close to or be reminded or associated with the trauma, and it's extremely debilitating and intrusive. So it's really it's not a clinical PT. We don't know, and I don't know the full answer to this, because this is something we've not seen before. But it would seem that this micro combination of daily little traumas that combine. And some people may have single traumas about COVID as well, but it would seem more likely, and from what the discussions in the panels around the mental health index other people have suggested, not just my opinion, that these uncertainties and these micro traumas have sort of come together to get people's thoughts and feelings to the level of intensity where they now tick box their answers that hits the flag that says, these people are almost as severe as people who've got PTSD with respect to certain aspects of their thoughts and of their feelings. So it's an intensity index more than anything.
Well, that's helpful. And I think because one of the things that I've been saying for months as I work with leaders is how you're feeling about all this. I don't know how you're feeling, but what I know is not everyone's got the same feelings. Not everyone's having the same reactions. Not everyone's having the same levels of stress. And so I think that slide, and I'm just going to put it up again just for a second, is important for us to hear, because some of us as leaders maybe we're feeling this and we need to hear this to sort of understand it for ourselves, or maybe we're not, but that doesn't mean you don't have team members that are, right? I look at that and I see like 20%, above 20% of the folks that you screened were positive for this intensity of thought that we could characterize as PTSD. So this is a big deal. And so what would you say, I want to ask this sort of at three levels. What should organizations be? I think you've told us what we need to know, but what should we now do? As I'm going to ask the question organizationally, individual leader and individual, right? So as what advice would you give to organizations? Here's where we are. Here's where our brains are, right? Now what?
So that's the key question, Kevin, and thank you for your clarity and timing to be so clear and coming to the solution rather than just the whoa, like this is not good. This is fascinating. Yeah, it's fascinating, but so what? People are really struggling with broken thoughts and intensities that are not typical in their lives. Now, it will give us a greater empathy for people, firstly, who have this independent of COVID. And it just really highlights the main point of where the solution, or not solution, what it means for leaders. Well, firstly, it suggests that this level of intensity gets us beyond the threshold of let's show that we're an empathic company, tick box the HRs to get a little, send us to a mindfulness app. We've got different language about mental health. we've got compassion, we're PC correct, and we crucial, because it all changes the dynamics. This is so far beyond that. This is not a nice to have, you should do something about mental health. No, firstly, it highlights that there's no them, us. Everybody goes through periods of the day, their week, their life, where they fluctuate from coping to peak performance. And some people don't cope. And we're all in this journey. It's just the extent to which we differ. And that's what the international database has shown us, that these labels are incredibly stigmatizing. So firstly, what do we do about this? The reality now that the productivity in the companies is going to be dramatically affected by this level of uncertainty and stress. So that's the first point. The second point is, what exactly are you going to offer employees? Firstly, what are you going to do yourself to deal with this? Secondly, what are you going to offer employees in a simple way that can, in a step-by-step manner, give them choices? What do I do about my stress today? We have 50,000 thoughts a day, approximately. How are you going to help them to change one of them? Not some great program, tick box. Heidi also introduced me to the American Institute of Stress, so I'm now glad to say I work with increasingly. And the editor of their journal, Dr. Cindy Ackrell, said to me that she's really concerned about the number of should lists. You should do this, you should do that, you should sleep more. Seriously?
We need to stop shooting on ourselves is what we need to do.
That is not a solution. In fact, I have many friends in the brain dynamics industry, follow behavior help at a deep global. They say this is part of the stress. Part of the stress is those should lists, when you feel you're not doing them, make you feel like a failure. Giving somebody a should list without a how list, or one thing to do, and this is where people like Heidi are phenomenal. You listen to her programs, her podcast, you will never hear her not end off with that. Here's one thing you can do about your stress today, and one little meditation that I will tell you in 20 seconds that you can do. So the issue is not, and it's not even, that's not enough even, and Heidi knows that, and we talk about this a lot. What exactly is a pathway of options, but simple, clear? How do I deal with my stress and one broken thought today, like right now, within 60 seconds? What do I do next? What are my options? Because maybe you're quite sophisticated. Maybe you've been meditating for years for half an hour a day. What do I do next? So a lot of it is meeting people where they are, simplifying the options, resolving from the 15,000 health tech apps that are out there. Recommend 3 that you have faith in, that you believe can help people and get beyond the should list. So that is a long answer to a short question, but I would summarize it in one line: less talk and more specific solution options for how you deal with one broken thought in 1 second. That's all I got, man.
One broken thought in 1 second. I love that. So I told you earlier that your comment about simplicity driving insight was going to be a thing I was going to think about all day. But now I don't know, because should lists and how lists. I mean, I talk about that kind of thing, but I've never said it that way. And that is really good. So for all of you that are here, you should be glad that you're here as we're talking to Dr. Evian Gordon. I've got some other questions for you. But before we do that, I want to make sure that we don't forget this, because I do have another guest joining us eventually. I don't want to forget that one of the places that people can go is to totalbrain.com to learn more about what you're up to. Anything else you want to point people to? Where can people find the mental health index we were talking about before, for example?
No, I honestly, as wanting to not give people should lists, my goal is, people will find their way at totalbrain.com, but they should absolutely go to Heidi's site and look at the optionality she provides. But, the reality is it's better. I'm not saying people should find their totalbrain.com, but if you don't befriend your brain at this time, it's much harder to deal with, the should lists become more daunting. Like, the reality is it happens in the brain. I mean, there may be other things, people have different views about the extent to which the brain is the brain, mind is everything. It doesn't matter. That's just the difference. Is your personal preferences can just be built into that. But find one thing that works for you today. And I'll just, if I could, now that you've mentioned Total Brain, I would just even like to be very concrete. You just go to totalbrain.com/consumer trial. It'll give you free access to try it, and go to the library of tools after you've done your little assessment to get a snapshot of yourself, and start off with one tool. And I would recommend go to the brain training and do resonant breathing. Now, you go, seriously, another person talking about telling me how to breathe or how to meditate? No, actually, we all know how to breathe. And we all know that meditation and being calm and quiet and breathing slowly is good for you. But the reality is, thanks to some phenomenal science, it's a wonderful example, Kevin, about how interconnection, even of East and West and past and future, if you breathe at 6 breaths per minute and you follow a breathing bar or listen to the sound, it has deep reasons why it is one of the best ways to switch off your stress response in the moment and switch on your relaxation response. And I will tell you one point just to bring the circle back about interconnection. Having had a heart background and now being in the brain, that 6 breaths per minute has very much to do with how you control your blood pressure. So it's all interconnected in a deep way. It takes a wonderful spiritual idea of breathing slowly, adds some new science, and we even, Kevin, for those who want to try it, you can measure your heart rate variability on the phone. If you just seek that request to Total Brain to give you access, if you want to trial it, and you can then see the extent to which it's calmed you down, because the higher your heartbeat variability, the calmer you are. So there's all sorts of ways where you can quietly expand that through visualization tools, etc. But that is the suggestion. And there are many others. Some people would prefer to just go to listen to neurotunes, which is music designed to calm you, which is also 50% of people, of the million people who've used Total Brain, 50% of the current users find that the most calming thing. So I'm just wanting to be specific, because I don't want to finish my time, and I know I'm almost done, Kevin, because your second guest is coming, but I wanted to make sure that I didn't end off with giving you some should things without at least one concrete suggestion about changing one thought in the moment in 1 second.
So as it turns out, Heidi, I should have just given her the link. She could have just joined us. But she also said, I've got it here somewhere. She also said humor is another good option. And it's so
totally
interesting because one of the things that I wrote about several months ago is the new meeting metric should be laughs per meeting. Like, if we're not having any laughter in our meetings, because we're interacting together less. And so when we interact together, it ought to be more valuable, and that isn't just about business value.
And thank you, Heidi, for adding that, because honestly, a smile is something you can do in 1 second. And by the way, when we looked at us, we've had 30 large brain laboratories. When we look at even the way people smile or pull their shoulders back, the impact on your brain is mind-blowing, pun intended.
Breathing, listening to different stuff, smiling.
Neurotunes, music.
We got 3 things right there.
Okay, 3 things. Two more than us. 2 more than what, but choose one of those and do them deeply, immersively, in the power of now. The power of now is the power of presence is everything, as we know. If you want to stop you being derailed by your past regrets and your future concerns, but you've got to. What's the how of now is what I like to hear. The how of now is where we're at, and neuroscience. I think, Kevin, the last thing I'll share with you, neuroscience is moving to the how of now. Thank you, Eckhart Tolle, for your wonderful years of inspiration about the power of now. But neuroscience is now opening the door to the how of now in new ways, adding wonderful science to these 2,500-year-old ideas.
So here's the thing. I am so glad that you've been here, because I was absolutely hoping that what we could create is, there are millions of leaders in the world, many of whom have figured out that there are mental health challenges for themselves and for their teams. And yet they're not equipped like you are to, they don't have the letters after their names and the knowledge after in their brains to actually help or feel confident in that helping. And I think you've given us some very tactical, practical things that we can do individually and that we can share with others. And I think as leaders, even if we take it a little bit back to sort of the work itself, that if we can help people stay in the how of now of the work rather than the worry of the future and the regret of the past, even if we can simply do that, I think we can have a huge impact on helping people be more successful, both now and in the future.
I hope so, Kevin. It's been wonderful to speak to you.
It has been my pleasure. I'm gonna let Dan join us, and then we're gonna say goodbye to you. And hello, Dan. I'm gonna put up.
Hey.
I'm gonna put Dr. Gordon's back up here if I can find it again. I want to make sure I got it right here. There it is. It was totalbrain.com/consumer trials. I got that right?
No, just consumer trial without the S.
No S, everybody. I'm going to take
S.
it off before we leave. I wasn't sure. I'm going to put that back up here before we leave, or before you leave. Evian, thank you so much again for being here.
If I could just say one other thing for those who want to listen to Heidi and Chris Darwin's great-great-grandson and myself on podcasts, you can also hear some of this on the Total Brain podcast. I hope you don't mind that I just mentioned that as well.
No, absolutely not. Total Brain podcast. Dr. Evian Gordon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, sir.
Have a good weekend. Thanks.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Dan.
Hey.
Welcome.
Good morning.
How are you today? You are my second guest today, and both of you are in the Bay Area. So let me introduce everyone as we sort of shift from one expert to another. I'll introduce Dan here in just a second. But all of this Future of Work live series is leading up to our live cast, September the 30th. We hope that you'll come join us on September 30th for a live cast in a different platform where we're going to do a bunch of things to help us all sort out and succeed in this future of work, this hybrid workplace. And as I said earlier, we've been bringing people to this series that go beyond our expertise. And so you can go sign up for that by going to remoteleadershipinstitute.com/livecast. I hope you'll do that. And now with that, let me introduce Dan Bladen to you, if I can slide this over on my screen. Dan Bladen is the co-founder and CEO of Chargify, where he and the Chargify team are, get this, building an operating system for hybrid working. He is a patent author, keynote speaker, and has served on the leadership teams for international standards bodies. He has raised capital from leading technology investors, including Intel Capital, HP Enterprise, and more. He has a hero of a wife, 3 kids, a degree in theology, and is a Techstars alumni member, and he's our guest just now. And Dan, thanks for being here.
I'm also under-caffeinated, so let's have some fun.
You are caffeinated, you said?
Under-caffeinated, so let's...
under. Well, we'll see if we can't make that better. So let's just start right here. Let's just start with that phrase in that bio that I highlighted. An operating system for hybrid working. So we'll get into product and stuff later, but like, what do you mean by that? That's a sort of a big idea, and it really captivates me. So let's just talk about that in general first.
Yeah, I mean, so much involved in that statement, I suppose. I think obviously, the way we work has changed forever, right? And one of the things that I'm really passionate about is that we have this huge opportunity as society to reshape the way the world works forever. And when my kids think about or will hear me say, I'm going to go to work, they're going to be like, what do you mean go to work? So work is no longer a destination. And it's my belief that the platform for work has completely changed. The platform for work used to be the workplace, the office place. The platform for work is no longer the office place. The platform for work is the working week. And so we think that there is a fundamental change in how companies need to approach working in a hybrid environment. And we believe that's all about people and not so much about spaces.
I love that. You know, the whole idea of going to work kind of goes back about 120 years, and we'll pick on Henry Ford. It wasn't only Henry Ford, but it's that whole idea of we've got a factory, and that's where 9 to 5 came from, and that's where, in many ways, we're going to work. You know, if I was a blacksmith, which is pretty close to what Henry Ford was in a way at one point, like that was at the house, that was in the barn, right? In the garage or whatever. And well, it wasn't a garage because there was no car yet, but you get the idea. And so what we have so deeply ingrained is really not all that old in the big picture. So but I think your point of it being deeply ingrained in us having this big opportunity to make this shift, I think is completely true. And
yeah, and I mean, if you think about where that came from, right? I mean, we inherited offices from factories and industrial lines, and we went from the garden shed, you know, building 1 chair a day, or, you know, crafting a dozen nails a day or whatever, to factory lines, because the kit, the materials, the supplies, the tools of the trade were at the factory, and they were not commoditized. And the tools of knowledge work and white collar jobs today are completely commoditized. 9 times out of 10, they're in our pockets. They're with us in our beds. They're with us on the plane. They're with us at the weekend, which is all a challenge, right? As well.
Yeah, that's a whole nother story.
But the tools of the trade have been commoditized, and the pandemic has effectively thrown the chessboard up in the air and gone, right, now that we can see that and spot that, how does this change and impact the way we approach solving the problem, which is ultimately, how do I get my best work done? And yeah, we think that's the fundamental shift, that the tools have been commoditized and the workplace is now just a tool. It's a tool, in our opinion, that enables people to do particular types of work better than doing them completely remote. But we see it as just a tool rather than an end in and of itself.
So I think I know enough about this to make an accurate statement that your organization, I mean, lots of us have had to pivot since May of 2020.
Yeah.
And Chargify existed before that. And I believe that you've pivoted a good bit, right? And so I'd like to, you know, as a leader, as a CEO, I'd love for you to talk about that. Like, how have you pivoted since the start of the pandemic? What sort of lessons have you learned? We're going to get back into sort of what you're doing now to create this operating system for us all, and some of the tools that you're creating. But like, that's not where you all were 2 years ago. Exactly. Sure. Right. So talk about that a little bit and sort of what you've learned as a leader through that process.
Yeah, so Chargify has been going 8 years. It was founded after my wife and I went traveling around the world for 6 months, from South America around India. And we spent a ton of time going in and out of coffee shops and bars, from looking
not necessarily in that order, I suppose.
Yeah, it depends on time of the day. Looking for 2 things: connectivity, Wi-Fi, and power. And the product, the coffee or whatever, was a byproduct of what we actually went into these locations for, which was connectivity and power to reconnect and recharge with friends and family back home. And I came back from traveling, met up with a close friend, great guy called Charlie, who became co-founder of the business. And we set about building a wireless charging network. So for power, what Wi-Fi has done for connectivity, and helping people have power on tap wherever they went. So we started in coffee shops and restaurants, putting wireless charging into tables, into furniture. But what was unique about Chargify was that we built software management to enable organizations to put hundreds of wireless charging units, thousands of wireless charging units throughout their property. So whether that's working with Marriott, or whether that was working with MGM in Vegas, for example, where we put wireless charging out for sure, but then we allowed engagement, we allowed certain amounts of management, firmware updates, etc., to these wireless charging units. And then just before the pandemic hit the Western world in kind of February, March 2020, we had made the decision to focus our efforts on offices and workplaces. Reasons being because we had a growing list of integrations with companies like Zoom, where you put your phone on a wireless charging spot. We called them a Chargify spot. It would recognize you, recognize the device, and then trigger what we'd call a next best action. So you've got your phone, 1.7 billion devices have wireless charging in now. You put your phone on a table in a meeting room, let's say, it recognizes you and automatically does a calendar lookup and would trigger the next best action. So that would be, for example, launching my next Zoom call. So I'm not touching the equipment or trying to figure out how to get this thing to get online, etc. And so we were doing a bit of business with a relatively well-known co-working company with a global footprint. And they had moved their New York team to 100% hot desking. And they said, we would love to use your Chargify spots for checking in and checking out of hot desking. So when I get to hot desk, I put my phone on a Chargify spot and it would check me into that desk. And obviously, wind forward a few months, the pandemic happens, we figure out what we need to do, or start to try and figure out how we respond and react. And companies were saying, we're going to go hybrid. You know, this is last spring when people were talking about coming back after the summer, last September, little did we know. And
yeah, I had clients who said, we sent people home for, we'll see you all in 2 weeks, right?
Yeah. I mean, I rebooked flights from March to May thinking there's no way the world's going to let the economy pause because of yeah. I mean, how ignorant and arrogant were all of we at that time, right? But the interesting thing here is that companies were saying, we're going to treat our spaces differently. Companies like Okta, fantastic customers and partners of ours, where they're already doing flexible workplaces and flexible working environments. And remote was somewhat already their default posture. And they came into the offices to do certain types of work. And they said, companies like that said, we'd love to use your product for hot desking. Fast forwards, again, we're now last summer, and these companies said, hey, we need you to integrate with these scheduling companies, this calendar, et cetera, and we went to some of those companies that our customers are working with and say, hey, we'd love to integrate with you. Our joint customers are asking for us to integrate. And these companies essentially said, great, but you need to get to the back of our product roadmap. So I had 30 people on the team at Chargify at the time, and our entire sales process was now beholden to our partners' roadmaps.
Right.
And so there was 24 hours at the end of July where a new board advisor, my VP of sales and I all texted each other with exactly the same idea, and just said, well, how hard can this be to build ourselves? And so we set up building this, what we now call an operating system for hybrid working. But what we realized was that other companies are really focused on space, booking meeting rooms, booking desks, car parking, booking, like all good things. But essentially, we think hybrid is all about scheduling and not about space. And so we can touch on that a little bit more because this is the most fascinating thing about hybrid, I think. But that's essentially what we did. We pivoted the company. We decided to indefinitely pause all our wireless charging activities because things are just absolutely flying for us. We had our first sale of the new product in February. We're now over 100 customers, growing monthly very, very fast. So that's kind of a little bit about how we pivoted.
So we could have a whole sort of marketing case study conversation, but that's not really the conversation I want to have, as interesting as it would be. And I would personally be interested in that. What I want to do is talk about here's how I found you, right? And we had people here last week when we'd hoped you were going to be here and you weren't able to be here. And so I wanted to get you here. But the way I found you was we have clients saying, we're going to have to do this hot desking thing, hoteling, whatever people want to choose to call it. And we're going to change our workplaces. We're going to have more people than desks, if you will.
Yeah.
And so, that's a topic that we don't know anything about other than that it needs to happen. I will tell you this, that I've been telling people, I wish I'd have thought about building that software, a year and a half ago. That would have been smart. So you're another 2 people today on with me, smarter than me. But what I want to talk about is there are other people in the marketplace besides you. You're doing something different, partly because of this story of when you came into the space. From my perspective, from what I know that makes you different is that you're focusing on a social component of this and not just about space. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, 100% fair. Room booking, desk booking, visitor management, they're all crucial components of what offices are going to need for to handle hybrid. The biggest thing that people are going to need, however, though, is to know who, when, and where, not just where. And if you think about it, if you think about kind of the structure of work, you start at the bottom of the hierarchy with the why am I working? That's your mission, your vision, your strategy, your values. Then you go to what am I working on? That's your objectives, your key results. Then you've got how am I working? And then this is the toolkit, right? This is the way you've got Slack, Zoom, Teams, email, and now the office is just part of that toolkit. And then you've got where, when, and who. And those 3 on top of that pyramid are essentially what organizations need to figure out, in our belief, in order to thrive in a hybrid world. And so companies that are just acquiring booking software to go back to the workplace in due course, and many of our customers in the UK and Europe are already back in significant ways, quite honestly, you're going to be somewhat embarrassed if you spent 18 months preparing to go hybrid and you've got Slack and team channels and email groups and people texting each other going, when are you coming in? Because I need to book. When are you coming in? Because I need to book. And it becomes what I call a hybrid hassle. It becomes a complete mess. And so what we're developing is a tool called Cadence. And Cadence essentially lets you map your flight path for your week, your quarter, when you or your team or your social group are going in. And so, Kevin, if you're heading up marketing in San Francisco and you've got 50 people, you might set a marketing cadence for Tuesday and Thursday every week in the SF office, right? And I'm head of product, and we've got a new product launch coming up next month. I can find your schedule, your cadence, and I can tag along to that. And the really cool thing here is that, let's imagine you have an IKEA delivery on the Tuesday. Now you're not going in, right? You're not going to go in, which again is a hybrid hassle thing, or daycare changes for your kids or whatever. And I turn up, then I'm not going to trust the system. I'm going to come into the office now and potentially just sit on Zoom, where they could have saved a commute. Right. And so it's like a mesh, all of these interweaving threads need to come together in an intelligent cadence. And that's just the employee side. To your very good point about space and reduction of space, JP Morgan, 0.6 desks per person now. Space managers need a forecast, and they need a future-facing forecast of how that's going to be used. And so, Joe or Jane in HR or facilities, they now need the ability to move marketings or suggest marketing, hey, can your cadence move? Because engineering have an all hands this Thursday. So there's 2 sides of it, but we think it's all about schedules. It's not about space booking.
So, and this is where the work that you're doing connects to the work that we're doing around the team components of it, the work itself, the rhythm. I love the word cadence. I love that word in general. I talk about a communication cadence all the time. So the intermeshing here too is, now I not only do I want, depending on the size of our team, not only do I want to come to work today, this wouldn't apply to our team, as it turns out, but with 15 of us, and not everyone could be here, even if because they don't even live here. But if I want to come to the office, and I know I'm coming the same day as Angie, but we all know, if we remember 2 years ago, that we could be in the same office building, but if we're on different floors or if we're halfway across the building, it's not all that much different than being remote. So I want to be near Angie. So I not only, because there's that social component as well. I want to be on the same day as Angie this particular week, but I also maybe want to find a spot. Where's she going to be so I can be close to her? Fair?
Yeah. So absolutely, yeah. So seeing on the floor plan where different teams are, where individuals are, like all of that's key. You know, getting the notification. Let's imagine you and I were in a social group together and we're just connections on the app, right? And you and I, we love to watch Monday Night Football together. But you don't normally go in on a Monday. But let's imagine you book on a whim to go in on the Monday. That would notify me and say, you know, a friend in your connection has gone in, is booking to go in, and I would get a ping on the Sunday night saying, do you want to add that to your cadence? Like that's the stuff. That's the stuff that's going to make other companies outperform other companies if they get it right. And it's, as I said, it's so much more than space booking. It's absolutely, you've probably seen the memes of, have you come across desire paths? These are places in like parks and people just go straight across the grass. And that, I think, is essentially what's happening a lot of the time right now when workplace managers are buying booking systems. They're laying out nice pavements for people to follow. But unless you give the people the ability to create their own path, which is all about giving them the context of where, when, and who, then you're gonna. I'm quite worried for workplace managers that are not thinking about this, because they could very honestly have egg on their faces. You've had 18 months to prepare. We've still got this mess. But to your very good point about the right people on site, I think we're all acknowledging, you know, I use the analogy of throwing the chessboard up in the air and see where everything lands now. There are different types of work that are done in different places. And ironically, Silicon Valley, where I'm based, your last guest based, is actually quite pro returning to the workplace. And
yes,
ironically, and
that's a big irony, actually. Go ahead.
Well, and I think one of the key reasons for that, and when I speak with other companies our size, a little bit bigger, it's because they're product companies and they're crafting product together and they're looking to make decisions quickly. And so what I've seen from startups, 100+ people, is saying, we're desperate to get to back to the office because we're not making decisions fast enough and we're not being creative enough in order to build the next layer of our product set that we need to enable our growth. And that is just a whole different gear to other types of work where it may be about processing or execution. So I think the whole idea of lumping work in this bucket and is it hybrid, is it remote, is it all on, like, is really, like, there's so much, like life, right? There's so much more nuance in everything. Whether news headlines like it or not, there's nuance here. And I think those that will outperform others are those that will understand the nuances and will build patterns and systems to help those different nuances flourish. So
Daniel posted a very long comment here, but I wanted to, I've had the chance to read it, and not everyone's going to have a chance to read it. Here's what I want to. He says, it's true we need the data of space to put a rationale on how workplaces will be accessed. And that's excellent and true. But I think it's this next nuance level. It's interesting that you use that word nuance. In our book, The Long Distance Leader, we said it's rule number 1, leadership first, location second. We don't need to throw out everything we already know. We need to think about the nuance, the differences that will make the huge difference, the small hinges that swing the big doors. And I think that, you know, you made a comment a second ago that says, well, you've had 18 months to figure this out. Hopefully you figured it out. And that's true. And none of us have figured it out, because once we get back, we'll need to tweak it. And I'm sure that I will steal your analogy about, you know, the sidewalks versus the walking paths, right? I went to school at Purdue, and Purdue prided itself on, once the walking paths got built, they paved those, because that's where people were really walking. Yeah. And so I think that we're not going to figure it out. I mean, we should be thinking about it. We should be trying stuff. We should be engaging our teams in helping us try it. And we need the right tools. And I think tools like what you all have created are important to that, because it helps us get at more than just solving the real estate problem, right? Which was the niche, which is a need. It's an important need. It's the question everyone asks first, but it's all that comes after that and what we learn from all that as individuals and as leaders that will make the big difference.
100%. And Dan is building a terrific company. offixu.com, I believe, Dan, is your company's site. It's and I've got a couple of customers to send you away that are looking for this kind of elastic storage. Think about it like Dropbox or AWS for space, right? Let's imagine that JP Morgan scenario, 0.6 desks per person. What happens on Thursday when they're at 0.6 desks, but they're at 1.3 people want to come in, right? So that's where these types of solutions need to be, the elastic storage for files in the same way for space. And I think that's a huge opportunity for some companies. But space matters, of course it matters. It's going to have a huge impact for companies being able to outperform others, I believe still. But it's now just a tool. It's not an end in and of itself. It's not the platform for work. The working week is the platform for work. And the workplace in that scenario becomes just another tool that can be used for certain types of work. And I think it's also fair to say, and we often forget this, is that, you, me, others, we've got our networks built and building. I've got very blessed to have a spare bedroom. Others in my team don't have that. Younger people don't necessarily have that all the time. So there needs to be that in mind as well for companies. Going back, one of my family members is a partner at an economics firm. Young people are not learning as fast as they used to. So all of this needs to be figured out in the wash, in the rub, as it were. But I think it gets figured out in a people first perspective, not in a let's all get to the space first and then.
I think you're exactly right, and I think that it's going to take thoughtful people and thoughtful entrepreneurs like what you all are doing to help us all do that. And at the end of the day, it's balancing the tension between output or outcome and others or the people, certainly, but it's got to be done in a way that isn't overly clouded by the way we used to do it, right? Because as I've been saying, we're at a moment that matters. There's never been a time in my life, and I'm older than you, that has had this much impact on our future and this much impact on how work is done. The only two things that are close are the introduction of the PC into the workplace and the widespread adoption of the internet, both at work and in the world. And those were both slower than this.
Yeah.
And so I would argue this one might have as far-reaching implications as the others from a societal perspective.
Yeah, I think it's ginormous. It's everything from our pensions, like a little known fact, a great company called Huddle, a UK company, their founder talks about, is that so many of our pensions and the pension funds are actually overexposed to office spaces because for years it was this predictable high yield. So you've got that on one hand for society. And then on the other hand, you've got wildfires in California. So you go, urban spaces, are they going to be okay? What's going to happen? You've got people flocking back to New York right now. Loads of people went to Miami for the spring, in the summer, but people flocking back to New York. You've got young people that, they say that cities have several engines, right? So they say London, for example, is the most resilient city in the world because it's got finance, it's got law, it's got government, it's got media, it's got tech. There is no other, I don't think, global city that has all those engines running apart from New York, if you consider the government, the UN. So it is these mega cities are going to be really resilient, I think. The interesting thing here in California,
they're going to change though. They're going to change. They'll be resilient in the big picture, right? But back to our nuance scenario, I think those will change.
Yes, but when you think about, New York New York Center and suburbs have just had a huge floods. Loads of people went to Tahoe here in the start of the pandemic, but it's been fires for 2 months now almost, and it's 300 ppm. You can't breathe. And so now you're layering climate change, and we can all get very metaphysical about this very quickly, but yeah, lots of changes from sandwich shops and pension funds through to, second homes and where young people can thrive. I think it's a huge societal shift, and I don't think governments help themselves very often when they talk about return to work and stuff, like as if people haven't been working. So there's lots of nuances and subtlety in language, because language is how things get created, right? There's lots of subtlety in language that I don't think proponents of either side get particularly right. Again, there is no space or oxygen for nuance. So I think there are some really simple things that language could help as well in distilling all of this.
I put up this link. It's a long link, so if you're watching, if you're watching later, it's easy. You can pause, right? But this is a guide, a free report, if you will, that you all put together. You want to comment on that? Then I've got a couple of final questions. I'll just leave this up because it's so long. You want to comment on this quickly, Dan? And then I've got a couple of final things before we wrap up.
I can't see the link. Tell me what the link is.
Oh,
here we go. Guys, create a hybrid workplace and put your people first. Sorry, yeah, I can see it now. Along similar lines, right, to what we're talking about, you've got to consider, I think, Chargify now, we're hiring dependent upon time zones, right? So one of our investors, a company called RGA, hugely well-known digital agency, they used to have, they've got 3 offices in California, LA, San Francisco, and San Diego. They do not talk about the 3 offices anymore. They call it the California team. And the really interesting thing here is that you're seeing a lot of weight come out of HQs and a lot of gravitas being sucked away from HQs. And people are orchestrating on time zones. We've got a member of our team who has moved to Central America on her own whim, with our approval, because she wanted to be on the Pacific time zone for her working day. And so I think you've got people that are agile and able, moving for time zones, which I think is really fascinating. If you want to do synchronous work and asynchronous versus synchronous, there's a whole other debate. You can double click on there. But so we're only hiring GMT +1. Like, we do not hire GMT +2 or East, if that makes sense. And we're only hiring GMT +1 to GMT -8. So think Western Europe to San Francisco. That's our hiring window, right? That's our hiring window. And so it's everything from who's getting overlap with people synchronously. Yep. Where are those locations where you can have your face-to-faces, and HBR, Harvard Business Review, talk about 5 modes for hybrid, of which by far my favorite is the clubhouse mode, which is essentially imagining that your company, X.com, let's call it, Elon's old company, X, it becomes like a private members club for your company, where you can pop in, you can grab a desk, you can use the facilities, right? And you can go and meet with other people. And I think GitHub had a very successful model of that in San Francisco, and Dropbox are doing something similar with Dropbox Studios. Essentially, companies turning their real estate into their own WeWork environment. So people first, it's all about people, not space. And how do you help people navigate the complexities of hybrid? So yeah, check that out.
One last question. What's one thing that you, based on the conversation we've had today, based on where we are on the 10th of September, 2021, what's one thing that you would encourage leaders to do right now as they're looking, and they're doing different kinds of hybrid, there are different stages in that transition, but what's one thing you would encourage leaders to do today?
Go to chargify.com and book a demo, and then I think the one thing is realizing that there's not one thing. Like, I think that there needs to be a flexibility in your approach that is not binary. It needs to be considerate of what's the engineering team want, right? So our engineering team will not come into an office if they don't have double monitors, right? They just won't, because they're not going to be as productive and efficient as they are at home. Whereas my sales team and marketing team will not go into an office if it doesn't have enough breakout spaces. And they're entirely two different ends of the spectrum in terms of what they want to use space for. So don't be binary. Think from first principles about what is actually wanting to be achieved, what work is actually wanting to be done, and then making sure you're crafting, creating, and putting people in the environments that make them do their best work.
I'm going to leave us there and talk about the two ends of that spectrum, because you mentioned it several times, and that is first principles. What's the work? Let that drive everything else. And yet we're talking about people first. And so when we put those two together and we work from those two perspectives, in a non-binary way, to your point, then I think we got a chance to have great success. Dan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks for your leadership in all this.
It was my pleasure. And everybody, that's another episode of the Future of Work Live. We've got one more next week. And like I said to you before, the reality is that we're doing a live cast. We're going to go over a lot of this. We're going to share a lot of stuff that we are learning in our organization and with our clients every day. And so I hope that you'll join us on September 30th for that. All the details are here, remoteleadershipinstitute.com/livecast. Hope you'll join us there. It's free. All you can do is go remoteleadershipinstitute.com/livecast. One other thing before we go, if you haven't heard this, you want to know this, I think I have a link here that I can show you. I do. Next week, on the week of the 20th. So next week we'll be here live in this series. And then the following week, all week long, I'm going to be live from this very desk on another platform in virtualleadercon.com. 40 different thought leadership experts, leadership development, organizational development, professional development, all week long. We will simulcast here on Friday, the 24th at noon. At least that's our current plan. But you'll want to join us for Virtual LeaderCon. It is an unbelievable experience. It's not just what you get from the guests and from me, but what you get from the community and this magical platform that we use for that. We hope that you'll sign up for that for free. Virtualleadercon.com starts on September the 20th. All the details are available at virtualleadercon.com. Thank you all for being here on Friday. We'll be back here next week. Cindy Huggett is my guest next week. Next week, we're going to talk about learning in a virtual world. How do we do that individually? How do we do that collectively? And Cindy's an expert in that area around virtual training, virtual learning. And we're going to have her join us. Hope that you'll join us then Friday, noon Eastern time on the 17th. We'll see you then. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend. Have a remarkable day.